A corridor stretching nearly 43 kilometers in the South Caucasus shook Putin's entire dominance in the region. The area that Moscow had considered its backyard for years was radically changed with a single signature in Washington. On August 8, 2025, Armenia and Azerbaijan shook hands at the peace table in the White House. At the same time, a strategic connection plan called TRIPP was announced. This was not just a diplomatic protocol, it was a move that would rewrite the political map, energy corridors, and military balances of the region. Now, the pieces are shifting rapidly in the South Caucasus. In this new equation, the US and Europe's transition to Central Asia via Turkey, the complete bypassing of their routes through Iran, Russia's waning influence over Armenia and Azerbaijan, and most importantly, the US gaining operational rights in one of Central Asia's most critical regions, are all at stake. So who will win and who will lose? Donald Trump is mediating a new peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan by bringing the two sides of the decades-long tension in the South Caucasus to the same table. The signing ceremony took place in the state dining room with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan standing alongside President Trump. One of the most striking elements of the agreement, named after Trump himself, was announced as the Trump International Peace and Prosperity Route, or Trump Bridge for short. This initiative will connect Azerbaijan's mainland to the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic via Armenian territory. This means the redefinition of the strategic route known as the Zangezur Corridor in Baku and the Syunik Road in Yerevan, which has been a source of controversy for years. The intersection point of the statements made after the signing ceremony is clear. Border integrity is preserved. The emphasis on Alma Ata 1991 is not just a decoration in diplomatic texts. The phrase internationally recognized borders and sovereignty serves as a security lock designed to eliminate the controversies created by the concept of a corridor. The model presented here is not an extraterritorial strip independent of sovereignty, but a transit system in which Armenia retains full judicial and administrative authority. What does this mean? In practice, customs control, border security, emergency response, environmental standards, and expropriation procedures will be entirely subject to Armenian legislation. The implementation protocols to be agreed upon will only detail how these powers will be exercised. The right of development for the US is a separate issue. This refers not to administrative authority, but to the granting of priority licenses for commercial operations such as investment, engineering design, construction, and maintenance and repair. But let's face it, the real meaning of this framework is that Russia is now a guest in a field where it considered itself the host. So why did Moscow come to this point? First, its military leverage has been reduced to zero. The Russian peacekeeping forces that settled in Karabakh with the 2020 ceasefire were forced to withdraw from the region in the spring of 2024. The line protection function on the ground has ended, and Moscow has lost its most visible means of pressure. Second, diplomatic leverage has melted away. The Minsk process has effectively collapsed. The table is now controlled by Washington and Brussels. Third, the bonds of alliance have been severed. Armenia has suspended its membership in the security bloc led by Russia. With the protection promise broken, the basis for political partnership has collapsed. Fourth, the cost of the war in Ukraine. The long-running conflict has drained Moscow's attention, resources, and prestige. The era of solving things with a phone call in the Caucasus is over. For Iran, the risk is more concrete. The Iranian route alternative that could take shape via the Aras corridor faces a trip line passing through Armenia and could lose leverage. Tehran does not object to the continuation of the emphasis on sovereignty. However, the realization of uninterrupted access linked to the Turkey-Azerbaijan axis weakens Iran's transit leverage. In other words, Russia feels a loss of role. Iran sees the risk of income leverage loss. So what did the US do with TRIPP? It filled the vacant shaft. The right to develop formula does not technically violate Armenia's sovereignty, but it anchors the financing, operational design, and standards to the US-European axis. This is a polite way of saying to Russia, these are not your lines, these are our rules. Let's break down this picture. The Baku-Tbilisi-Kars line, with its latest modernization efforts, has reached an annual transportation capacity of 5 million tons. This serves as a strategic backbone for the land leg of the middle corridor between Asia and Europe. On the energy front, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline and the SCP TANAP TAP chain, which transports gas from the Shah Deniz field to Europe, ensure the uninterrupted flow of the southern gas corridor. Over the past 2 years, the Middle Corridor has recorded triple-digit growth in container transportation. This demonstrates both the growing appeal of the route for east-west trade and the scalability of infrastructure investments in the region. TRIPP's model of connecting Nakhchivan to the Azerbaijani mainland via Shunik and operating this line under Armenian sovereignty has the potential to link up with the BTK via Kars in the west. Thus, the three main pillars that feed energy and trade flows can be brought together for the first time within a single political framework. This integration creates new standards, not only in terms of physical connectivity, but also in terms of tariff harmonization, customs facilitation, and investment security. But is this line really 43 kilometers long? This has long been the case in the literature, with analyses and commentaries repeating this figure, but the official text does not mention such a number. Moreover, some technical descriptions give different estimates, such as approximately 32 kilometers. The reason for this confusion is clear: the exact route is still on the table. In the Shunik region, considering the valley, slope, landslides, settlements, and existing road railway networks, the questions of tunnel, viaduct, or ground improvement will be resolved through engineering. Therefore, the only thing that can be clearly stated today is 43 kilometers is a commonly used estimate. It is not an official confirmation. Noting this uncertainty calmly is essential for keeping both politics and the construction program realistic. Let us now turn to the operational and legal issues. The phrase US development rights is understood by the public as foreign administration, but the framework's goal is a civilian commercial model that respects sovereignty and focuses on transportation and trade. How will it work? Most likely, a private partnership will be established on the Armenian side or will sign a contract with Armenia. It will gather financing and technology from US-based companies. Local and regional subcontractors will be involved in construction and operation. Authority sharing will be defined in the implementation agreement. Customs gates, inspection, security, maintenance closures, environmental impact, and other issues will be managed in coordination with Armenian institutions. An extraterritorial security zone or foreign law enforcement authority is not part of the basic scenario in this language. This framework must also balance the credit provider's collateral expectations with return and termination clauses. Otherwise, financing will not be secured. Therefore, it is essential to carefully distinguish between transfer of administration and concession development. Details such as duration, arbitration venue, and revenue sharing must be discussed based on the text. As of today, these details are unclear. So, can Russia return to the negotiating table? It can, but this time, it will not be the party making decisions at the table, but the party expected to abide by the rules. Because the issue is no longer whose land is this, but who writes the rulebook. This is where TRIPP is dangerous for the Kremlin. If Russia's sphere of influence in the Caucasus stems not from the number of tanks or bases it has there, but from its power to set the rules, then this is a direct strategic loss. Let us also note the counter-arguments. Some will say, this is a Washington showcase. The wind will change and the region will lean toward Moscow again. Theoretically, this is possible. But in practice, there are two powerful obstacles. The first is the guarantee of sovereignty and jurisdiction. It smooths out regional sensitivities. The second is the pull created by economic flows. Measurable benefits include days saved by block trains, a noticeable drop in insurance premiums, and millisecond-measured speed gains in data transmission. As the economy gets on track, politics will have to follow suit. So is TRIPP an American administrative move? Number. The text does not mention either a time frame or a transfer of operations. The word administration does not appear at all. The US's real trump card is the right to develop the project. That is, providing capital, setting technical standards, and designing the master agreement. Authority and jurisdiction remain entirely with Armenia. This distinction undermines Moscow's ability to stir up domestic public opinion with claims that sovereignty is being lost. This time, the Kremlin can only object to foreign standards, not foreign governance. This is a more difficult struggle that must be waged at the bureaucratic tables rather than in the streets. There are two possible paths. Scenario A involves harmonized implementation. Sub-regulations are prepared within 6 to 12 months. Customs and insurance processes become transparent. Concrete steps are taken in the area of rights and freedoms for local approval. Impact. Train frequency increases at the BTK, bottlenecks in the Middle Corridor become manageable, and TANAP tap capacity expansion projects attract investor interest. In this scenario, Moscow's room for maneuver narrows, and its rule-setting role shifts to the US-EU axis. The Kremlin's near-abroad doctrine effectively becomes null and void in the Caucasus. Scenario B: friction and delay. The debate over administration or rights creates tension in domestic politics. Iran and Russia undermine the process with propaganda campaigns and border tensions. Human rights issues remain unresolved. Impact: investors wait, protocols remain on the shelf. In this case, Moscow gets some breathing space but only gains time. It cannot regain the ground it has lost. This is because the concept of peace and connection is now locked into Western norms. Russia's remaining tools to influence the Caucasus equation are now limited and lack multifaceted pressure elements. The most visible card is still information operations. The Kremlin can try to influence public opinion through media manipulation, targeted social media campaigns, and regional discourse engineering. This can be complemented by coordination with local politics. Russian-aligned parties and figures in Armenia and Azerbaijan may take steps to slow down or complicate the process. Another card is playing on energy price shocks, geopolitical maneuvers or supply restrictions that trigger fluctuations in natural gas and oil markets could disrupt economic planning in the region. Finally, there are promises of alternative logistics. For example, Iran could try to overshadow the TRIPP line by offering attractive transit tariffs for South Corridor variants via its own territory. But these moves have a common limitation. None of them will stop the rule book from being written. At most, they will slow down its implementation. Because projects like TRIPP are shaped by technical standards, legal frameworks, and financing agreements. Moscow is no longer at the negotiating table in these areas. It is now in a position of external intervention. Moreover, while the war in Ukraine continues, resource allocation is already constrained. Military personnel have been withdrawn from the Caucasus, and economic reserves have been diverted to the front lines and sanctions pressures. More importantly, the narrative legitimacy has eroded. Although no one in Moscow wants to say it out loud, regional actors clearly see that Minsk has collapsed and we are no longer the ones setting the peace table. This narrows not only the Kremlin's toolkit, but also its leverage. So why did the EU provide swift support? There are both strategic, economic, and normative policy reasons behind the EU's swift response after the August 8 signing. First, the 1991 Alma Ata Declaration and the principle of internationally recognized borders are not just diplomatic rhetoric for the EU, but serve as legal insurance for its energy and trade projects. The emphasis on the inviolability of borders guarantees that TRIPP will operate under Armenian sovereignty without any extraterritorial status. This makes it easier for the EU to transfer resources to Central Corridor investments with a low-risk premium. Second, the Caucasus-Anatolia line has long been a critical geo-economic backbone for Brussels. The delivery of Azerbaijani energy flows to Europe via TANAP, the oil supply security of BTC, and the cargo capacity of the BTK railway are at the heart of the EU's strategy to reduce its dependence on Russia. By adding a new land leg via Syunik to this backbone, TRIPP will diversify both supply and transit security. Brussels is therefore keen to quickly put financing mechanisms and technical standards support in place. Third, TRIPP is not just an infrastructure project for the EU, but also a lever for its soft security agenda. The integration of issues such as human rights, political prisoners, freedom of expression and border violations into the implementation protocols strengthens the EU's regional influence from a normative framework. Indeed, both during and after the ceremony, statements from Brussels emphasize these issues in particular. But if these articles are not linked to an implementation timetable and monitoring mechanisms, they will remain a diplomatic gesture rather than producing lasting results. The EU's swift support is therefore motivated not only by a desire to invest in connection projects, but also by the goal of advancing energy security, trade diversification, and normative influence in tandem. But Brussels knows that a TRIPP model that does not enforce human rights provisions on the ground could have political costs and has therefore already turned on the warning lights. In summary, the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process is a visionary initiative aimed at transforming the South Caucasus from a region divided by ethnic conflicts and closed borders into a region of economic cooperation, integration, and political normalization. The region's strategic importance stems from its vast energy resources and its position as a crossroads between Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and Central Asia. The new transportation route will serve to revitalize trade routes and energy exports, benefiting both Armenia and Azerbaijan as well as the global community seeking secure access to Caspian energy resources. The agreement also reflects the post-Soviet power structure. The United States is countering Russia's traditional dominance in the South Caucasus by taking on a leadership role in securing peace and developing strategic infrastructure. This alignment is part of broader geopolitical trends in which Moscow faces setbacks in many areas, from sanctions to direct war in Ukraine. The success of the peace agreement in the coming period will depend on the willingness of both Armenia and Azerbaijan to continue dialogue and cooperation, as well as the sustained efforts of the US and other countries. This fragile peace offers hope to millions of people who have suffered from decades of war, displacement, and insecurity. If preserved, it could mark the beginning of a new era of stability and prosperity for one of the world's most geopolitically complex regions. What are your thoughts on this matter? Your opinions are very important to us. Please share them in the comments section. We look forward to seeing you in our next analysis. Thank you for watching.